Imagine it. The year is 1839. A ship off the coast of Long Island is trying to make its way back to Africa, specifically Sierra Leone, when a new U.S. Navy ship stopped it. It turns out the ship's name was Amistad, and it was from Spain. Aboard the ship were over 50 Mende, including 4 children, who were abducted to be thrown into slavery in Cuba. At the point when the ship was seized by the U.S. Navy, it was revealed that the Mende had taken over the ship. A month prior, a revolt had broken out while en route to the Caribbean island. It only took 3 days for Cinque Pia, also known as Joseph Cinque, to break free from his shackles and become a leader of the Mende to basically murder the captain and the cook. He did spare the navigators, who were also the plantation owners, Jose Ruiz and Pedro Montes, in hopes that they would help him get back home. You may be wondering, how was the ship by New York if they were originally headed to Cuba? Well, essentially, they wanted to get caught. Well, the plantation owners wanted to get caught. So they purposely navigated north instead of east back towards Africa. On August 26th, the USS Washington seized the Amistad. While they were boarding, a lot of the Mende jumped off the boat and tried to swim, and they were caught offshore. But whether they stayed on the boat or they jumped off to escape, they were all arrested. The boat was actually towed to Connecticut. Officers from the USS Washington immediately recognized the problem: communication. No one was going to be able to talk to anyone because no one could speak Mende. A language professor from Yale University went out in search of someone who could translate, and he found James Covey, who was a sailor living in the United States and was actually from Sierra Leone, and actually has a kind of special connection to the story because he actually went through a very similar situation years prior. He was originally captured from his hometown in Sierra Leone and was a slave for a handful of years before he was captured by another group and was on his way from Sierra Leone to Cuba to be a slave there on the plantations. In his case, a British ship intercepted and freed him because by this point in time, the Atlantic slave trade was pretty much deemed illegal all across Europe. So anyone being transported uh, from Africa across the ocean to be a slave was doing it illegally. James Covey stayed with Lewis Tappan, who was a well known abolitionist, and Lewis actually went out of his way to help raise funds for the defense of the Mende men who were arrested from the Amistad. And having James Covey living with him, he ensured that the translation from Mende to English would be protected. Seizing of the Amistad was a big deal. The Spanish wanted the men to be sent to Cuba to be slaves on their plantations. Abolitionists wanted the men to be free. So this whole time, even though they were detained, their status was very much in limbo. As you may have guessed, they were arrested, one for murder, but also piracy. So they were detained, waiting to see what was going to happen with their charges, and at the same time, there were 2 lawsuits filed. The first were from the officers of the USS Washington who believed they had a claim on the property on the Amistad. And by property, yes, I mean human beings. The other lawsuit was by the plantation owners who wanted the men to obviously be released so they could go work on the plantation. But what makes their lawsuit particularly interesting is they had a special request to President Van Buren to have their captives be returned directly to Cuba. What gained international interest, though, was the Supreme Court case U.S. versus Amistad. And the men were represented actually by the former U.S. President John Quincy Adams. And the court ruled in favor of the Mindy, saying that these men were not slaves. They were, in fact, born free. And the fact that they murdered the captain and the cook was basically their legal right to defend themselves and assert their own freedom. In the aftermath of their victory, 35 of the 43 Mindy went back home to Sierra Leone to live in a place called Freetown, and James Covey went with them. The Amistad continued making history after it was sold at auction in October of 1840 to Captain George Hawford, who sailed around the Caribbean legally transporting food items for a few years until it fell off the historical records after it was sold in 44. For more information about things that happened during Martin Van Buren's presidency, please check back on his episode.